So you're looking back at your previous year and you're thinking to yourself, how can I do things better? Being a professional landlord means that you do things differently. It's no longer a hobby, this is a business. And so today we're going to talk about 8 ways that you can evaluate your performance as a landlord to take your game to the next level. Let's get started. So there's lots of different methods for you to improve your landlording business. Today I want to talk to you about 8 elements in your landlording business that I think if you pay special attention to, particularly if you feel like you just haven't gotten a good pacing with it, or it's one of these skills where you are still lacking, I think that you can make the next 12 months the most productive 12 months you've ever had. Because we don't really grow when we're not tracking our progress. If you don't know where you are, you're never going to get exactly where you want to be. So what I want you to do with each of the topics that I'm going to present to you is I want you to give yourself an honest evaluation. And I'm going to give you a few criteria in each category for you to judge yourself. And be fair to yourself. Give yourself an honest look and grade yourself on a scale from 1 to 10. Where are you really on each of these? If you're a 3, but you want to be an 8 or a 9 or a perfect 10, then you got to implement some changes. And so we're going to talk a little bit about each section. You're going to give yourself a grade on each one, and then you're going to come up with a plan to get there. So when it comes to tenant screening, this is all about the game before the game ever starts. The pre-game in landlording is absolutely essential. And I've seen so many landlords get this right, but too many landlords get this dead wrong. They either skip this or they don't take tenant screening seriously. If that's you, I want you to think about a few things the next time you've got a new tenant to evaluate. The first is to know your criteria up front. Know the things that you want, know the things that you definitely don't want, and be able in writing to present these to each of your prospective tenants. We call this pre-screening, and you can get around the not so serious prospective tenants by simply letting them know exactly what you're looking for, exactly what makes an ideal tenant for you. If you're able to tell this at the jump to any prospective tenants who see it and say, well, I don't qualify because I don't have this or this or this, then you're going to save yourself a few headaches going through and evaluating people who simply don't meet your expectation. But the truth is, if you never put it out there, you yourself may not know what it is that you expect. Take time and decide for yourself what it is you want out of your next tenant, and then consistently evaluate each prospective tenant against that criteria. Let them know upfront how you will be evaluating each tenant who applies, and then go get the best one. Make sure that a component of your evaluation is the big 4. You always want to check for credit history, employment history, criminal history, and rental history. Now, you're going to have a lot of options on how to do this. So maybe you're already doing it, but the system you've used in the past just isn't great. This may account for why you're a 7 and not a 9. This year, you should go and evaluate yourself and say, how can I do this better? How can I get from 7 to 9 just by the service that I use to evaluate the big 4? Again, if you're not checking for credit, criminal history, rental history, and employment history, you really should find a system where you're getting this done. There are services out there that'll do it for you. We don't advocate any one, but I guarantee that a simple Google search will find plenty. Additionally, later on in this evaluation, you're going to talk about groups that you can join. There are resources out there that are going to help you and help to advise as to what has worked out for other landlords. But if you don't know, find out and start using something that will improve your tenant evaluation. Additionally, going one more step always makes the difference. It's not enough to let your prospective tenant know what you're looking for. It's not enough to go and screen them for it. There's one additional thing that sometimes landlords simply don't do, and that has to do with personal verification. Sometimes it's as simple as doing a Google search. Does the employer that your prospective tenant listed in their application even exist? Are they still employed by them? Picking up the phone and making that phone call and making sure that you can verify each of the points that are in an application is extremely important. You'd be surprised just how many tenants put false or misleading information in an application. With a personal verification, you're going to get around all of that, and you're going to be better off by not taking on a prospective tenant who has started the whole thing by misinforming you. Naturally, landlords, if you are enjoying what you see, give us a thumbs up. We greatly appreciate that. Any questions or comments, I'm going to respond to those personally. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. Now, communication is another area of landlording where people sometimes don't pay a whole lot of attention. They don't value it until they've lost it. One really great way to make sure that your communication remains open between you and your tenants is to have more than one method of communication available. If all you have is a cell phone number, that's just not enough. Get a cell phone, yes. Get permission to text. Get an email address. Get a backup phone number. Maybe a work number. Some other alternative way of getting a hold of somebody, because the last thing you need is for somebody's cell phone to get lost and now you've lost all contact with your tenant because you really only had one method of communication. Some of you are sophisticated enough or broad enough to have client management software, and all of your communication goes through the tenant portal. But again, that's just not enough. It's an excellent way of communicating, but you're going to want these other methods, and you're going to want to make sure that they're listed in your lease. Now, you may be asking, Ernie, well, my lease is 6 months old. How can I alter my lease? Simple. You draw up a simple addendum. It's a communication addendum that you can draft, have you sign, have the tenant sign with these alternative methods of communication. It may be an email address, which was not in the original lease. It may be a backup phone number. It may be a work number. It may be some other method of communication, text, or through some messaging app that you have and you use and you enjoy that you now want to incorporate in your landlording business. Anything that adds to the communication is going to help you. But it'll only help you if you're using this method of communication with regularity. Make sure that you are in contact with your tenant more than just at the beginning and the end of the lease. That's not good enough. That's not going to lead to you doing all the things that are necessary to have a professional landlording business. Communication should be open and it should be regular. Make sure that you're checking in on your tenant. You don't have to pester them. You don't have to be a nuisance, but you should communicate with them more than just once every 12 months. Come up with something that works with you and your tenant and just check in. Finally, make sure that you recognize that silence is a bad thing. If you've attempted to communicate with your tenant on multiple occasions and receive silence after silence after silence, it may be either A, your method of communication has broken down, your message isn't getting to your tenant, or it may be that your tenant is ghosting you, and that's probably a problem. If you need something from them or you need to express some message to them, whether they're avoiding you or whether you're simply not getting to them, you need to find a way to express your idea to them effectively. Don't just ignore silence. Silence means there's a problem. Deal with that problem and make sure that the communication pathways are open so that you can conduct your business on a high level. Maybe for you, rent collection is a problem, and you gave yourself a low mark because in the past you've had difficulty collecting rent. And whether that's a matter of, well, I don't feel like bugging people, or it makes me uncomfortable to talk about the money, you got to get over that really, really quickly, because unless you're collecting the rent, you're not making money. So get past some of these mindset issues about the collection of rent and understand that it is one of the most fundamental parts of a landlording gig. But one way that you can improve your rent collection is to make it easy for your tenants. If they only have one way to deliver the rent to you, that's probably a problem, especially if that way is not convenient. So think about the ways that you allow your tenant to pay their rent and make sure that you've discussed the ease in which this can happen. Maybe you have them deposited into an account. Maybe you have a tenant portal where all payments are submitted online, easy to view, easy to accept, easy for them to submit. Maybe you go and collect the rent from them and they're uncomfortable by that. Again, if the method of rent collection that you're using is not easy for your tenant, then it's probably going to eventually be an impediment. Don't let the method of your collection be the reason you don't actually collect. Come up with a method that works for you and that's easy for your tenant. Second, make sure that your collection is consistent. Don't be up and down, left and right, and all over the place with what you're willing to accept and when. If you have a strict policy of accepting only the full amount of the month's rent, then stick with that all the time. If it's a matter of, well, I let them pay when they pay, that sends a very weak and really terrible message to your tenant. You should have a set date. Generally speaking, your lease says something to the following effect: your rent is due on or before the first day of each month. That's the best policy. Make sure that you are enforcing that policy when you're collecting rent. If your deadline is 7 days, stick to 7 days. Don't let it go beyond whatever it is your deadline happens to be, because rent collection only gets harder the longer you wait. Be consistent every time. Make sure your line is in the sand, and if it's crossed, you're doing something about it. And when it comes to doing something about it, that includes collecting late fees. Remember that late fees are a component of the rent. They should be a mechanism for you to say, I find late payment unacceptable. But by just waiving late fees month after month after month, you are sending the opposite message. You're telling your tenant that it's perfectly fine if they pay on their own schedule, but that creates problems in your tenancy. Make sure that you are not just consistently collecting the rent in one way, but that if it turns out that they've crossed that line and now have incurred late fees, that you are consistently charging for late fees. Additionally, make sure that if your tenant owes you for any other matter not having to do with rent, for example, for HOA fines, maybe for damage to the property, that you are collecting those funds using your application of funds clause, if that exists in your lease, but that you're using those funds toward those non-rent obligations first, and then letting your tenant know, you owe for these things. I sent you a notice about the HOA fee that I was assessed because of your action, which violates the lease. Or last month you owed late fees which you did not pay. I have now taken them from the rent in accordance with the application of funds clause. Make sure that along with late fees, you are enforcing other non-rent related payments that are owed to you under the terms of your lease. As long as you've given adequate notice, whether it's in the lease or by written notice delivered to your tenant, you should be able to, through the application of funds clause in your lease, to collect those sums from the rent payment and then send notice to your tenant that rent has not been fully paid. By doing this, you will definitely collect the amounts that are owed to you, but also by enforcing the lease, you're going to prevent things from escalating into bigger trouble. Property maintenance is not just something that you evaluate at the end of the lease. That is a huge mistake. The maintenance of your property is something that happens beginning, middle, and end. It's a non-stop feature of your tenancy. And so one thing that I tend to recommend to landlords is the 3-9 method, which states the following. You are going to let your tenant know that you're going to be there after 3 months and then again after 9 months of any 12-month term. And the reason this is important is because you need to be there to inspect the property to make sure that things are running in accordance with the lease and your expectations for that tenant. After 3 months, you're going to get a pretty good indication of the kind of tenant that you have, because you're going to get to see whether or not they're taking care of the property. If already after 3 months you see some major issues for concern, you might at that point institute a process to have that tenant removed. Definitely you're letting them know by written notice that things have to change. However, if the opposite is true and things are fine, and then at the 9-month evaluation, things remain fine, that's when you need to start calculating an approach to maybe keep that tenant in place. Because nothing's harder than having to replace a tenant, particularly a great tenant. But if you know this is somebody you want, you may start courting them sometime after that 9-month evaluation. Because you may find that not only has rent been paid on time, not only are these pleasant people, but you're not getting out of the landlord gig, and so it behooves you to begin early in the process to make sure that this is somebody that you're going to be able to keep long term, and then you begin talking with your tenant about the next 12-month term. Remember that if you are having to do a repair, that you as a landlord are 100% in control of what that repair looks like. I discourage landlords from having tenants complete the repair themselves or hiring somebody else to complete a given repair. The problem when you put the responsibility on the tenant is that it's incumbent on them to get it done quickly and cheaply, and that doesn't always mean adequately. And so the last thing you want to do is have them start it and either not finish it or finish it and it not rise to the level of your expectation, so that you have to do the whole thing over. Then you're going to have a problem charging them for something that you permitted them to do and which they did, and now you're fighting over whether or not they did it properly. Instead, put all that to the side. If your tenant has damaged your property, go in there, complete the repair, and issue them a bill. Have 100% control of it, just like your lease should already explicitly say. And this way, you know that your property is well maintained and that if the tenant is liable for it, you have given them notice of those costs. Landlords don't always think about customer service as part of the landlording business, but it can make the difference in your landlording business between having good tenants and then having great tenants long term. Customer service can be as simple as you showing appreciation to the good tenants for the good things they're doing on your property. If you have a tenant who's themselves going above and beyond, it makes sense for you to do something to make them feel appreciated, to make them feel welcome, to let them know, I really like that you do these things and I appreciate how well you take care of this property. Whatever you do, don't forget to express your appreciation. Again, for those tenants, especially those tenants that go above and beyond, match that with you going above and beyond and doing something a little nice during the holidays, maybe at the anniversary of the lease signing. You go and do something just to say thank you for taking care of the property, or for whatever it is that you're looking to accentuate as an attribute from them that you really appreciate. Another element of customer service is your response time. Sometimes tenants have a lot of requests, and sometimes tenants have real emergencies. How are you responding to everyone? The truth is, not every tenant is great with this. Some of them will hound you and hound you and hound you. But for the ones who really only reach out when it's absolutely necessary, if you have a policy in place to have a quick response within 24 hours, you are responding, whether it's a huge emergency or not. Tenants appreciate that. Tenants will respect somebody who goes out and at the very least responds to their text, responds to their email, responds to their phone call. Just because you're doing things behind the scene, if you haven't actually informed the tenant of it, they may not be as conscious of what's going on. They panic, they freak out, and sometimes they run to the courthouse. By having a policy of a quick 24-hour response that's in your lease or in your house rules, you can let your tenant know, look, whatever happens, you will get a response from me within 24 hours. If I can do it sooner, I will. But it will never take me longer than 24 hours if you contact me at this number or in this way, and I will acknowledge that you have reached out to me. By delivering that kind of customer service, you're going to make your tenant feel more comfortable, and you're going to lay a foundation in the event that you are sued, that you acted in a reasonable manner if someone tries to claim otherwise. Another thing for you to consider is to simply ask your tenants for feedback. What are their ideas of things that might need improvement on the property, or ways that maybe you and they could do things in a different way or in a better way, some methods of improvement. Maybe they have suggestions about how the property is maintained or how rent is collected, or perhaps how communication goes through between you both. By being available to this feedback, you're hearing directly from the people that you are affecting what it might take to lift your customer service up to the next level. And so it's worth asking. And don't just wait to the end of a tenancy. Ask in the middle, because you might end up resolving some issue of communication or rent payment or maintenance before it ever turns into a problem, simply because you asked. Now, naturally, from an attorney, you're going to hear about dispute resolution, because inevitably things go wrong. And so if it turns out that you and your tenant have a problem, or you've got a history of tenants over years and years of landlording, and you're still having difficulty resolving disputes, want to think about your method and the things that you're doing that could use a little bit of improvement. One way to make sure that you're doing things on a higher professional level is to make sure that with every dispute, all of the communication is in writing. It is sometimes tempting to simply pick up the phone and see if we can't just talk it out. But when you know there's a problem, you have to presume that either A, the verbal communication is going to be misunderstood, or it's going to be misrepresented. So your best bet is to have multiple methods of written communication that you can use in order to express what you believe the problem to be and what you believe the solution to be. By being able to lay all of this out in writing, you may be laying the foundation for future defense in some dispute raised against you in a court. But when you reduce it to writing, you're likelier to have a clear message and hopefully likelier to get a clear response from your tenant, simply because everything is written where you can read it once and evaluate it so that you don't miss anything. And if you did, it's right there in black and white. And if they did, you can point to it in black and white and say, well, this is what we discussed and this was my understanding of it. And if there continues to be misunderstanding, again, resolve it all in writing. Now that includes when you're issuing notices of default. When things go wrong, you are always going to want to issue notices of default in writing. Don't just make it a verbal reminder. Don't just request that things get done properly next time. Always put it in writing. That's going to help you tremendously. When you issue a notice of default, make sure also to refer back to the lease. What provision of the lease is in default? What thing did they get wrong? What issue is it that you're addressing? And what does the lease have to say about it? Perhaps you're even evoking the law, and maybe your knowledge of the law and how the law operates in a certain situation, and you're able to adequately talk about what the law says about your situation. And you're reminding your tenants of what your responsibility is and what their responsibility is in accordance with both the lease and the law. If you have that knowledge, go ahead and share that with your tenant if you feel that would help to resolve the problem. And definitely, when you are approaching default, when you're approaching problems with the lease and your tenant, you're always going to want a plan. I suggest what I call the 137 plan. And the 137 plan in a nutshell is basically this. During any 12-month period, you're forgiving one sin, particularly if there's some kind of violation that happened over the course of the 12 months, but was not repeated. In fact, generally speaking, what I say is if it happened beyond month 6, maybe it's in month 9 or 10, after a long track record of everything going right and one little slip up, you forgive it. But really only do it once. If this is something that repeats, you're going to need to call your tenant on it. But a once in every 12 months, probably something that you can waive, no big deal. The 3 is the 3 strikes and you're out. Certainly if there is something that repeats and repeats and repeats, it's unlikely to change, especially if you've given written notice, written notice, written notice. By the 3rd time that you're having to give written notice, you may have to strongly consider also issuing a notice to vacate, because that issue is not being addressed properly. And it may be that it is so egregious at this point that it warrants you simply terminating that lease. And finally, 7 is a number of days that I say is the absolute longest you should wait to collect the full amount of any month of rent. Once you go beyond 7 days, it becomes increasingly harder to collect, and it inevitably affects the following month. And so you just start this snowball effect of non-payment or late payment that just creates tension between you and your tenant. So that if you hit day 7, go ahead and issue that notice to vacate and begin the eviction process. If it turns out that the tenant rights the ship and gets everything paid for, including late fees, possibly court costs, then you can decide whether this is that one sin you're going to forgive. But for the most part, once this starts rolling, it's difficult for tenants to fix things. It probably means that the tenancy has come to an end, but you have to have that steady plan. 137 is just one of many approaches that you can have to defaults. But when you have problems, you have to have a method for addressing them. This is one of them. I've got other videos on this on my channel on this exact procedure. I encourage you to watch that. Now, you may find yourself saying, I wish I just knew a little bit more about landlording. I wish that I just had some way to gain a little more knowledge, to feel a little more secure in myself about what I'm doing. That's where this next segment comes in, is your knowledge of the law. And one really great way to improve your knowledge of the law is to get a mentor, someone who's walked this way more times than you have, someone who's got way more doors than you have, someone who's dealt with way more evictions and lease signings and dispute resolutions than you ever have, someone with the experience of the landlording gig for many more years than you is a good person to have in your cell phone, ready to call when things go wrong. Additionally, it helps to be involved in certain groups. I host a Facebook group called Texas Landlords, where we have over 4,000 landlords who routinely get together, ask each other questions, pose hypotheticals, talk about the law, talk about leases, share horror stories, but all of this to help each other grow, to have somebody who you can just talk about bad situations, or to hear from other landlords things that are going great for them, or why things are no longer a problem when they once were. All this is invaluable. If you're not part of some landlording group, I strongly recommend, whether that's online or in person, these groups are out there and you should join one. Finally, if you are not actively learning more about landlording, you need to start right now. Take a class, buy a book, watch YouTube videos on the subject, but do something this year, over the next 12 months, to improve your knowledge of professional landlording. Because the knowledge is out there, the experience is out there, the people are out there who can guide you through this process. Whether you've done this for a month or you've done this for 30 years, there's always room to grow. There's new stuff to learn. There are new laws in place. There are new methods for making money in this business, or for dealing with old trouble that's been around since the beginning of time. And so find those resources, get involved. Again, a class, a book, online resources, there's tons of it out there. You will improve this year by simply picking up one or more of these throughout the course of the next 12 months. Finally, if you intend to grow your business, it's because you're taking active steps to make sure that your business is performing on a business level and at top capacity. And one way to do that is to evaluate your own rent. Are you even charging what the market says is appropriate for your rentals? If you're not, find out what the comps say about property situated in your area that is similar to the kind of property that you're leasing out. You may find that you are hundreds of dollars below what the market otherwise would allow. Now, that might mean keeping a good tenant and simply incrementally raising that rent until it meets the market demand. But if you're not doing this, or you don't even know what the market requires for a rental like yours, you need to start asking questions. You can talk to a realtor. You can do some research online, but find out the data that helps you understand what your rental is actually worth, and make sure you're getting that from your tenants. You're also going to want to evaluate what you're paying out to contractors. I mean, you don't want to just have the most expensive contractor because you think they're the best. Once you're in a landlording group, you can just ask, hey, who do you use for this? What's been good for this problem? I'm currently dealing with this. Do you have any suggestions? Another thing is, don't do all the work yourself. So whether it's finding the best contractor out there or no longer being the only guy who does all of the work for your property, come up with a solution that makes sense and makes you money. This may also come down to simply giving your insurance provider a call and saying, hey, I'm currently paying X. Is there any reason I can't pay less? And if they say, sorry, we want you to pay more, you might want to have 2 or 3 other numbers in reserve to just shop around. When was the last time you shopped your insurance? You may find hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in savings just by making a few phone calls. If some other insurance provider can provide the same quality product and maybe better customer service, why wouldn't you just pay less for it? If it's out there, go after it. You're encouraged to evaluate your numbers always, whether it's your rent, whether it's what your contractors charge you or your insurance charges you. Go out there and find out what money you're spending and what ways you can get the exact same thing for less. This will inevitably grow your business. And finally, if you're looking to increase your portfolio of rentals, go out there and see what the market would allow. Make sure that you're able to maximize your landlording business in a way that's comfortable for you. Make sure that you've got a method of growth. What are you doing in the coming year to make sure that you're expanding, that you're growing, that you are securing your financial future by taking that next step and acquiring that next property? And you don't have to go out and do it tomorrow. You don't even have to do it in the next 6 months, but you should come up with a plan to make sure you know what steps need to be taken over the next 12 months to meet your financial goals. By taking a deep dive in your own business and a clear evaluation of what you're doing now, you are going to set yourself up for huge improvement over the next 12 months. Take this systematic approach to make sure you know exactly where you stand now, that you know where you want to be, and then every 3 months evaluate yourself honestly. Have I made improvement? Have things gotten worse? What can I do to change that? And every 3 months until you've hit a 12-month cycle, then look over your progress and celebrate it. Congratulate yourself in some way for making that improvement. And perhaps you don't see improvement in all 8 categories. You only see improvement in 1, but that is improvement. And maybe the next 12 months you tackle another category here, and then you grow each year as you progress until you are, in fact, that top-tier professional landlord.